Good evening. Just a short announcement before I begin. Starting with this video, I intend for the last video of each month to be a lecture based upon a reading of a longer essay that I will have written over the course of the month and which will form the text of the newsletter for the following month. April marks the first-year anniversary for the Academy newsletter, and Sebastian Lasota, who puts it all together, has challenged me to take it up a notch. One of the things I have had to sacrifice in order to learn and use as many foreign languages as I have is my own longstanding desire to write more in English. And for the newsletter, thus far, I've submitted rather short musings that I thought up and mulled over for a couple of days or a week. But from now on, I commit myself to writing a proper essay over the course of each month and publishing it in the newsletter. So if you want a transcript of the texts upon which these lectures are based, please subscribe. Thank you again, Sebastian, for putting the newsletter together in the first place, for challenging me to do more with it, and for holding me to that. So on to tonight's topic, vision for polyliteracy in 2024. Sometimes, to get a vision, it helps to close your eyes and visualize something. So would you do that for me? Would you close your eyes for a moment and keep them closed as I ask you to contemplate this thought? The ability to read literature in lots of languages. The ability to read literature in lots of languages. Really think about that proposition for a moment. Interpret it as you like and react to it. The ability to read literature in lots of languages. You can open your eyes now. Does that thought appeal to you? Does it leave you cold? Does it repel you? Perhaps you're thinking, what a waste of time and energy. Languages are outdated relics that only serve to divide us. The sooner we get with a single world language, the sooner we can get on with international cooperation. English is it for the moment, so let's go with that. Or perhaps your response is, no, thank you. Just doesn't grab me. I don't read a lot anyway, and I'm not interested in language study. Or maybe, well, if you're giving out the ability for free, sure, I'll take it. But I probably won't use it, though. It's just not relevant to my life right now. Most people in the world will probably have a response like one of the above. But if you're listening to these words or reading them in the first place, you're most likely one of the substantial minority who might say instead, sign me up. Perhaps this has always been a goal of yours, but you didn't know others were on board with it too. Perhaps you're interested in language learning, but never dared to aim that high. Perhaps you've never thought about it, but find the idea instantly appealing. Whichever of these reactions is yours, if you're in a prime position to benefit from knowing about and engaging with polyliteracy at various levels of intensity. This 2024 video is an update to a video of a keynote presentation that I gave at the Society of Geolinguistics in 2013, where I made the case for establishing polyglottery as a field of study. In the decade since, I've not only gained more experience perspective, but also spent time as director of intensive immersion programs for another institution. And most importantly, significantly, actually started my own academy 2 years ago. Over these past 2 years, I've continued to develop my ideas for polyliteracy in light of the needs and interests of the people who've been participating in my academy. I think unsurprisingly, they're a very educated group. Many have terminal degrees, PhDs, MDs, JDs. Many others are in or planning to attend graduate school. So, inspired by their support, this evening, I want to present my current understanding of polyliteracy and my vision for developing it. I'll begin by defining, explaining, and clarifying some terms and definitions, some that I've coined or others I just use frequently. Then I'll talk about different uses of the word polyliteracy, in particular for various stages of it. And after that, I'll describe the activities that I envision for an institute of polyliteracy, as well as its facilities and some sample curricula of study. So, to begin with the more general definitions, by polyglottery, I have always meant the systematic and disciplined process of developing oneself into a polyglot. Other scholars, including colleagues at universities in Moscow and Innsbruck, who are investigating polyglottery as a discipline, use the term more broadly as an adjective relative to the state of being a polyglot. So it's a polyglot. A polyglot is someone who knows many languages, typically 5 or 6, with the term hyperpolyglot sometimes applied to people who know 10, 12, or more languages. A lot of people use the term polyglot and multilingual interchangeably, but I see an important difference between the two. To me, multilingual people are people who grow up acquiring 2 to 6 languages to various degrees from their environment, whereas polyglots learn their languages as foreign languages by conscious study and application later in life. And finally, I define a foreign language as a language that one learns outside of its environment by application of intelligence. You might think that being multilingual by upbringing would propel people onward into polyglottery. But it's often the case that those of us who are originally monolingual are the ones who find foreign languages most fascinating. And this condition of finding foreign languages inherently interesting and of fantasizing about speaking or using a number of different languages, to find the idea not only intriguing but appealing, this is indicative of polyitis, which is just that, a tongue-in-cheek term for being bitten by the language learning bug, for finding the prospect of learning lots of languages strangely compelling. Polyitis, when it's harnessed, can lead to great productivity, but undisciplined can lead to frustration and self-recrimination. It follows that an institute or an asylum for those who have polyitis is in order to teach us the discipline needed to channel our impulses and to shield people who have polyitis from the negativity and discouragement that can so often come both from the broader world and from one's own slow progress. If you believe you may have polyitis, then you should know that activating your condition as a springboard for language learning is an endeavor rewarding on more levels than the obvious linguistic one. Polyliteracy in particular, my topic this evening, is a way for those with both polyitis and a scholarly bent, especially towards the humanities, to harness their drive to develop their scholarly abilities in a more rapid and less frustrating and isolating way than I experienced when I started out on my own. I use polyliteracy as a term referring to a branch of polyglottery that involves learning foreign languages with the principal goal of reading literature in them. Literature being not just belles lettres, but other culturally significant genres such as history, philosophy, essays, and things like that. This branch does not necessarily engage the attention of most polyglots, many of whom are more interested in conversational usage than literary studies. In short, polyliteracy means developing and practicing the ability to read and discuss classic works of literature in a range of foreign languages. the main purpose of a polyliterate person has for learning languages is not to communicate generally in those languages, but to read and discuss literature in them. This is the essence of polyliteracy as I've lived and practiced it myself for these past 30 years at least. The kind of formation and education that I'm now giving in polyliteracy to the students in my academy is based on the formation and education that I've given and I'm still giving to myself. I founded this academy to share the principles I've learned on my personal journey with those interested in following a similar path. I'm humbled and happy to be able to say that a community of people interested in polyliteracy and related fields has already started to form. So having opened my academy with this goal over 2 years ago now, let me offer polyliteracy to the world under various rubrics, which have arisen from my interactions with those who've come to study with me thus far. First, polyliteracy takes as its starting point the idea that well-written and important texts are best read in their original languages of composition. This idea, which underlies the pursuit of the ability to read great literature in a range of languages, is a very personal one for me. I grew up watching my father hold to this idea and develop the relevant language abilities his whole life. So I knew it was possible. As I pursued my university education, I sought to develop this ability as well. While I met with encouragement for my efforts as an undergraduate and early graduate student, as I progressed in academia, my broader language study was discouraged in favor of refining a single narrow track. From experience, I can say that even in fields that positively require the learning of multiple languages, language study is generally seen as drudge work rather than something to be passionate about. Indifference and even hostility towards language learning is quite widespread, even at times inside academic fields that would seem to foster and require it. Beyond this, many who have experience in learning and or teaching a single foreign language assume, logically but erroneously, that learning more languages will involve reduplicating that time and effort over and over again. And so they conceive of the project as terribly daunting, if not flat out impossible. So those with polyitis will want to be wary of such negative assumptions and should aim to keep the basic idea of polyliteracy, that great texts are best read in the original, always in view. Second, polyliteracy as an ideal holds that seeing things from a wide variety of perspectives of other languages, times, and cultures is the best antidote to the tunnel vision of seeing things from one narrow horizon. Polyliteracy thus aims to channel the comparative impulse, encouraging the acquisition of skills that will enable you to maintain a broad mind by developing alternate operating systems and seeing things through new cultural lenses and points of views. This ideal is why polyliteracy works hand in hand with the notion of great books education. It promotes reading and discussing of culturally significant works, not only from Western civilization, but also from Middle Eastern, Indic, and East Asian civilizations. Ultimately, in as many original languages as possible. Polyliteracy as an ideal seeks to counter the voices that would deny its possibility and calls out to those with enough drive to accept the challenge, to raise the bar and attempt to achieve something that requires deep work and focus. It's even possible, and not without historic precedent, to expand this ideal to the societal level, hoping for a society in which all educated people would be able to read and discuss at least one of a wide variety of foreign languages. Third, I see polyliteracy as a model for the delivery of continuous lifelong education, the beginning of a movement against the narrowness to which we are so often confined by our institutions and ourselves. So often I hear highly educated people confessing, we are not that highly educated after all. I first heard this cry from inside myself when I had finished my existing educational process and was told that I should devote the rest of my life to honing my expertise in what I'd just done. I felt in the marrow of my bones that I was not done, that I still knew far too little to do what I wanted to do. So this conviction launched me into the pursuit of breadth on my own, first within my field of languages, now ever more expanding into other fields. From myself and from those participating in my academy, I do hear the same cry. We're not as well-rounded as we would like to be. And I hear another cry, which is, and we want to do something about it. Well, people are answering the call of polyliteracy, saying, we may have had to accept the narrowing process to jump to the institutional hoops, but we were never happy about it. We regret compromising in this regard, and we recognize that now is the time to become better rounded. For many, developing enough skills in a single foreign language to enjoy reading and discussing literature in that language is a good enough step. But to speak for the moment to my fellow scholars in the humanities, I believe we should hold ourselves to a higher standard because we know the standard used to be higher. I find it encouraging when I hear other humanities scholars acknowledge that the bar has been lowered, that a century ago scholars in our position would have been polyliterate as a matter of course, and we're not. It's sad that this should no longer be the case, but there's no reason why this norm cannot return. Its disappearance should be a challenge to which polyliteracy is the solution. The decline in standards involves not only languages, but other disciplines. We're not as well-rounded as our ancestors were, and I will be the first to confess my own sorry case. I would love to be a Renaissance polymath, but I'm woefully weak in mathematics and science. I tried to remedy this by listening to scientific lectures put out by the great courses and the like. But without a broader contextual framework, I really only understand a small percentage of what I hear. Like all of us who are highly educated, that is, who've gone through the full process of educational formation, earning terminal degrees by the admittedly very valuable process of formulating, completing, and writing up a research project. I've developed expertise in one area at the expense of development in most other areas. The narrowing process works incrementally, asking us to turn this way or that at a certain crossroads in our lives. We're asked to make this or that choice or sacrifice, to prioritize this over that, and do some things at the expense of others, all with the goal of becoming experts in one thing and one thing only. While we may play along to get that doctorate degree, we need not lie still and do nothing to combat this narrowing. It's my fervent hope and prayer that my Academy for Polyliteracy will serve as the model for other academies of lifelong learning, aimed at educating those who are already, in theory, highly educated, not through a narrowing and temporary process of full-time research training, but via continuous participation in a community for lifelong learning. If such an academy for mathematics and the sciences, paralleling my own for languages and literatures, were to open tomorrow, I would be its first student. The model of ongoing education for the educated that I offer through my Academy of Polyliteracy has, I think, numerous justifications, or at least four major reasons to extend the process of systematic, lifelong learning over and against what was established in the past, that is, the full time in your youth to a certain finished point and then no more. The first reason is increasing life expectancy. We're living longer lives, which means that we have more years in which we could and should be learning. Secondly, there's more knowledge available. We've got increased access to other cultures, other times, more people producing significant cultural works, producing works of scholarship. There's more knowledge. And three, more knowledge out. There's two, there's more knowledge out there. Three, there's less knowledge in our heads. The quantity and quality of knowledge imparted by the educational process has been consistently watered down, particularly in regards to language education. Though we have ready digital access to knowledge, we carry less of it in our heads, and so we have less of a contextual framework for processing new information. And four, in our race to become experts, we've become excessively narrowed. So after establishing ourselves in our specialty, we can and should return to the kind of door-opening educational experience that we hopefully had as college undergraduates, but now on a slow and steady long-term basis. Fourth, beyond serving as a model for well-roundedness in other academic fields, I think polyliteracy ought to be viewed as a discipline for the intellect, paralleling spiritual or physical practices such as meditation or running. Like these other disciplines, polyliteracy is best cultivated by regular, slow, systematic practice over many years. The development of a habitual routine punctuated by specific practices with regular motivational reinforcement built in is not only critical to success in achieving polyliteracy, but it will shape your character and be applicable to other walks of life as well. Participating in a weekly discussion of literature in a foreign language over many years can transform simple language learning into a deeper practice. Over the past 2 years, my academy has become a congenial place for like-minded, highly educated adult learners to continue learning together. The accountability provided by participating in the academy and its community can help you stay focused on this project and therefore ensure return on your investment in it. Fifth, polyliteracy should help create venues for language learning and practice centered around discussions of literature. Such centers of polyliteracy, like my academy, will serve participants at many different levels of engagement. Some participants will want to maintain a single language over the years. Others will want to use the methodology and facilities to develop competency in a handful of languages. The weekly format for language learning that has emerged in my academy is one of guided self-instruction, where the focus is as much on learning how to learn as it is upon learning the specific language. This focus not only results in more effective study, but it is a transferable skill. With this approach, each new language facilitates the learning of the next, so that the process gets easier and easier with experience and know-how. After you've learned a certain number of languages, generally about 5 or 6, you should find that learning additional languages no longer poses the same type of challenge. This will be particularly the case if self-study is punctuated with a periodic week of immersion, which the infrastructure I envision for a physical language learning academy will be designed to facilitate. I'll describe this kind of infrastructure in a moment. Sixth and finally, I want to address polyliteracy as a field of study in its own right. My thoughts in this section are inspired not only by my own experience and vision, but by the aspirations of those for whom I've been leading reading and discussion circles these past 2 years. I have close to a dozen people taking 4 or 5 courses a week, and nearly a score of people who are taking 2 or 3. Some have indicated a desire to study even more intensively, time and money permitting. Directing reading groups for these people has already led to the development of a rough and ready curriculum, but some more planning is in order. Thus, below, I will outline curricula for several envisioned tracks. To clarify the standing of polyliteracy as a field with respect to other academic disciplines, polyliteracy, as I practice it, is a form of comparative literature as outlined in some of the foundational works of that field, like Erich Auerbach's Mimesis. Polyliteracy also incorporates elements from other comparative disciplines, comparative historical linguistics, comparative philology, comparative history of religions, before integrating it all with great books or classic texts, reading and discussions. If I indulge myself by imagining that 100 years from now, in 2124, polyliteracy will be an established field with its own full-fledged institute, then I imagine the life of a scholar there might be divided into 2 phases. First would be a period of going out into the world for original investigation and exploration of languages. For instance, by applying techniques of language transmission, mining, and extraction to document and learn from exclusively oral traditions. My own exploration of the Korean verbal system was my version of such a project, and I anticipate others going on to even more significant and exciting discoveries. This first phase would be followed by a return to the Institute to lead the next generation of scholars into its traditions. As will be clear from the features envisioned below, I see the life of such a scholar including a strong aspect of narrative performance, of storytelling, and the integration of other artistic and musical and spiritual practices into his studies. I would hope that these scholars would work on large-scale, long-term projects, each scholar with a magnum opus in progress, and lead a lifestyle more akin to scholarly monasticism than the academic life offered by most institutions at present, such as it is around publishing, conferences, and administrative busy work. A job description for such a position might read as follows: duties and responsibilities, continued participation in circles led by senior scholars, teaching languages, literature, and great book courses to non-majors, that is, to those who are not following a curriculum but coming to learn one language and keep it up, or to participate in the great books courses. 3, continued learning of languages and discussions of literatures, live the life. 4, internalization of text through memorization and public recorded recitations, so incorporating a bardic element into it all. 5, to serve as a guide, a mentor, a role model for the next generation. 6, integrate some sort of spiritual and or physical and or artistic exercises with language study. Additional duties framed around more specific scholarly projects might include to produce audio versions as well as translations of texts from the past, ideally in systematic format, a whole series from Germanic epics from the Middle Ages or Sanskrit novels. 8, to investigate linguistic mysteries. There's lots of undeciphered scripts out there still too. Unrelated languages, to which families do they belong? Proto-languages, Go back to the work of the early grammarians, now with a long breadth of language as well. Pick up where they left off and apply it to other language families. 9, you can work with anthropologists in field linguistics, focused on finding languages that have strong oral traditions of literature. And then learning those languages and those translations, that is, translating, documenting them, getting them down. And B, most more importantly, learning from those traditions, the content of these oral epic narratives themselves, that history they teach us, but also the techniques of internalization and memorization. How do people, pre-literate peoples, compose and remember things? That would be fascinating to explore from the inside. We work with anthropologists, we can work with zoologists, perhaps on animal communication. Who could figure out better if there are more forms of communication than people who've learned many different ones already? 11, I'd like for us to host and participate in a center of what we call worldview discussion and debate, to be conducted in sacred languages, in Latin and Sanskrit and Arabic, regarding the establishment of a canon of classic texts from other civilizations to parallel and complement the great books of the West. And 12, to develop and staff the facilities that will include an archive, a language learning resource center, a library of world classics, a shadowing chamber for listening and exploring, a language study yard and garden for kinesthetic learning, and language immersion scenarios. Most of the above projects require extensive facilities. So let me say a bit more on this point. Although, or rather because the Academy has gotten off to a good start as a virtual entity, I am now really eager to establish a physical base for the Institute so that members of the community can really get to know each other, and I can teach them things that I can only teach in person. Ultimately, I would like for the Academy to incorporate an in-person week once a quarter. The library is the first component of the Institute that I would like to make tangible so that students could borrow materials from it during in-person weeks. This library would include not only classic texts in the original languages, but the widest possible variety of autodidactic language learning materials, preserved together with their audio components in a language laboratory or sound archive. This sound archive will be a venue for the preservation of didactic recording materials from the 1920s onward, and these and other sound recordings will serve as a systematic documentation of language sound change over the years. In order to better shadow materials, dedicated shadowing booths will be provided so that visitors to the library should thus experience it as an interactive museum for language exploration. When it comes time to construct living quarters for the in-person sessions, I want to implement what I learned about intensive immersion programs for adults while I was at the Regional Language Center, RELC, in Singapore, and at Concordia Language Village's CLV here in Bemidji, Minnesota. RELC had all its facilities inside one tall hotel building, whereas CLV gets its name from having culturally authentic villages peppered through the woods around a central lake. This last setting enabled me to jerry-rig the single most effective and rapid language learning experience I've ever had. You can watch a video of me on my channel struggling through a conversation about religion and philosophy after 2 weeks in the Finnish village. When I say jerry-rigged, I mean I, as an advanced learner, was able to modify the program to apply all that I had learned about learning. In particular, I was able to perfect a technique that I call language mining or language extraction, a technique that I'd been honing and practicing since my postdoctoral time in Germany. Language mining or language extraction takes the generally accepted truth that one-on-one intensive engagement with a trained tutor is the best, most intensive way to activate a language, and gives it this twist. It's not the tutor who teaches, but the experienced and knowledgeable learner who guides the learning process, extracting or eliciting knowledge from the trained tutor as from a living reference manual, and ultimately engaging in a kind of language transfer or transmission. Therefore, I would like to have residential facilities designed for intensive immersion programs, including language mining or extraction on the part of those who have learned how to learn language as well. Such facilities would permit me to model, demonstrate, and train people to be both knowledgeable teachers for those who need to be taught, and also sources for those who already know how to extract linguistic knowledge. Thus, these facilities could serve as language bubbles for immersive language learning and maintenance. As a finishing touch, there would be an adjacent outdoor study space for kinesthetic activities, such as a trail to shadow while walking. By way of a conclusion, I have drawn up proposed sample curricula that will answer the practical question of duration. What could one achieve after 12 years of participating in 5 circles a week? I choose 12 years simply as a parallel to the 12 months of a single year. As each individual year has 4 quarters, each quarter consisting of 3 months, so this full program will consist of 4 distinct quarters of 3 years each. Curricular tracks could ultimately include classical etymological source language focus track. So learn Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, Arabic, classical Chinese. There could be a Germanic and Romance branch focus. I have a sample curriculum of that today. We could have a Slavic, Celtic, Iranian, Indic focuses. We could have Middle Eastern civilization, Southeastern civilization, Far Eastern civilization language focuses. And we could have what I'm going to call field linguistic or documentation focuses, and I'll have a sample curriculum for that in just a moment. The first quarter, the first 3 years, would be the same for all tracks. This would consist of developing French and German to the point of comfortable discussion of texts in those languages, both of which are not only immensely important literary languages in their own right, but also vital scholarly learning languages for further learning in all fields of the humanities. This quarter would also include courses providing a theoretical framework for polyliteracy alongside methodological workshops and training, more specifically. So now I'm going to go in, and I'm not going to read, but I'm going to give more the logic of what I'm doing. As I just mentioned, these first 3 years are going to consist of taking French and German through guided German or guided French into intro to French or German literature, and then into German literature and French literature. So the idea is we're going to take these 2 languages, which most good universities say you need to pass a reading exam in these, but that's the end you ever hear of it. And it's a very small, short exam. So we're going to say, well, no, actually, if this is the standard, we're going to actually do this well. Okay. These are languages that a scholar in the humanities should be able to read and discuss. And we're going to get to that point. And we're also going to start reading great books. And we're going to get a theoretical framework for language learning by some theory courses like Path of the Polyglot, Principles of Polyliteracy, and the like. There'll be a methodological practicum, learning specific techniques such as shadowing and scriptorium, learning your rhythm and pacing, learning what kind of endurance you have, learning what kind of kinesthetic techniques might work well for you, what kind of techniques of memorization you might want to employ. All of this through further self-study and improvement in French and German, and then some specific linguistic courses, giving a foundational course in comparative historical linguistics to know how languages are related to each other, some course in sound, not just phonetics and IPA, but narration, okay, recitation, voiceover training. How do you give a good narrative performance of a text? And then finally, also, I include what I meant field linguistics, and I do mean that in an anthropological sense, but also in the language mining or language extraction sense that I described. So that would be the foundational first quarter, or 3 years. And then from there, tracks might diverge from themselves as follows. The track that most closely mirrors what I myself did is sort of what I'm calling the sample Germanic Romance focus, focused on these two main branches of Western civilization, of Indo-European languages. And the goal here is what I'm going to call the standard goal of polyliteracy, that goal of attaining the ability to read and discuss literature in as many languages as possible. So, on the base of that, those first 3 years of getting thoroughly established in French and German, in reading and discussing great books, in the theoretical approach of polyliteracy, and in some practical techniques for narration, for studying, for delivery. By the 4th year, what we're going to do is we're going to start adding more languages in the Germanic and Romance families. We're going to add in the Germanic family, we're going to add a Scandinavian language, a Northern language, and another Western language. So written here, I have Swedish and Dutch are each going to be added in guided circles using German language textbooks. And likewise, we're going to start Spanish and Italian at the same time using French language textbooks. And our great books courses now, we are also going to use, instead of Adler's collection, we're going to use French and German translations. We're going to use French and German. We're going to discuss the great books in French and German starting in year 4. In year 5, all of that will go from the guided circle of learning into literature courses in those languages. Again, noticing that we're expecting and anticipating with this foundation that while it took us 3 years to get to straight literature reading in French and German, we should be able to do that in 2 years with these other languages that we're learning on the basis of knowing them already. So after we have a full year of literature in each of these 4 new languages, and we continue using German and French reference works for those, and also read and discuss great books in French and German, in year 6, we are going to move all of the, instead of having separate Swedish and Dutch and Spanish and Italian literature, we're going to combine those languages also with German and French, so that we'll have a Germanic comparative literature circle, reading and discussing German, Swedish, Dutch works, sometimes in alternation with each other, sometimes in comparison. Likewise, we'll have a French, Spanish, and Italian comparative literature circles. And in this year, we will start Latin, and we'll also start Old Norse. In year 7, Old Norse will go into reading literature, and Latin will continue its learning across the board as a living spoken language, not just as a dead language. And we will continue with the comparative literature circles and the great books. In year 8, it will only be slightly different. Old Norse will join the other um, Germanic languages, and we will start learning comparative historical English. So Old English, Anglo-Saxon, Middle English, Early Modern English, and Gothic together, and continue all the other courses. In year 9, something different will happen. In year 9, we will put all of the Germanic languages and all of the Romance languages into their respective circles, and we'll also add what I'm going to call Germanic branch growth and Romance branch growth. And that means that on the basis of knowing German, Swedish, Dutch, Old Norse, Old English, Middle English, Early Modern English, Gothic, English, comparative historical linguistics, how languages are related, and also having learned a lot of Latin languages. At this stage, when you come to want to engage with Norwegian or Afrikaans or Frisian or Catalan or Portuguese, you don't need to learn these the same way you needed to learn these others. You can grow them. You do need to study the particulars. You do need to get them to have them well. You do need to, yes, you do need to absolutely study all their specific details, but to get to know them, you know them already. So how can you grow them on the basis of what you know? That's what we'll do in the Germanic and the Romance branch growth cycles. Year 10, the Germanic and Romance cycles will continue, and instead of having separate Germanic and Romance branch growth cycles, we're going to have branch cultivation. Both the Germanic and the Romance language families are relatively small. There aren't that many members. So in 1 year of branch growth, we can get them. But if you're just going to grow languages this way and you're trying to bring them all, cultivating them, sort of like how you would need to continue taking care of bonsai trees in a special greenhouse in a botanical garden. So we'll learn how to continue to cultivate all the members of different branches. And that will open a free spot. So we'll start Greek, and we'll take one particular historical phase, say Koine, and start with that. I forgot to mention, in year 9, we will shift also to having our great books discussions in Latin from this point on. The text might be in other languages, but we'll have the discussions in Latin. And let's see, in year 11, the only change will be we'll go from Koine Greek to diachronic Greek, and in year 12, Greek will start over again. By that point, we should have gone a full cycle, hopefully, of the great books, and we might be back to the beginnings of the Greeks in the great books of the West, and we might be able to read them in the original, freeing up that slot to start opening Sanskrit. So that would be a sample of a way that one could progress over 12 years with these 5 circles a year in various terms. So, on the other hand, what I'm going to call a field linguistic or world language curriculum, whose main purpose would be to prepare people to identify hitherto unrecorded languages that have strong oral literary traditions, and to document, learn, and learn from these traditions. This might proceed as follows. To impart the widest possible base for linguistic comparison and effective language mining. Note here that the main goal is to develop and maintain conversational fluidity in the widest possible variety of languages. This is over and against the standard goal of developing reading abilities in related languages, because the goal is to send these people out with this wide base to encounter languages that had not been documented before, and on the basis of the wide base, hopefully have easier entry into new languages. So these people would have the same first 3 years as everybody else. Year 4 for them would look like this. It's very quite different, okay? First of all, of the 5 circles, 2 of them would be the same. 2 of them would be a Russian guided circle using German textbooks, and then we would have a Spanish and a Portuguese guided circle using French textbooks, together with the great books using French and German. So the logic for the this here for the Spanish and Portuguese should be the same as for the earlier thing. Russian is just a more complex, more different language and requires more time. So we're giving it two slots instead of one for the first year. And that will continue into year 5 when it goes into Russian literature with German reference works, Spanish and Portuguese literature, and great books in French and German. The reason we start with Russian and Spanish and Portuguese is the idea that if people are going to be looking for undocumented languages, they're probably going to be in areas of the world that might be in the steppes of Greater Russia or in the jungles of Brazil or in the Andes Mountains. So these are large languages that might have literature relevant to smaller languages in their greater realm. So I think these languages are very relevant to anybody who's hoping to go out and learn languages that might be somewhere spoken inside these territories. In year 6, after those are kind of grounded, we can put those together in a comparative literature circle to keep develop them, Russian, Portuguese, and Spanish. We're doing great books now in French and German still. And this is the year we're really going to open up. We're going to add 3 languages. We're going to add, I'm trying to just put languages in to get across the board, so there's no particular reason for adding Swahili and Turkish, besides the fact that they are both quite logical languages, despite being very different in structure. There's quite a simple logic to their languages, as different as they are, and they also both borrow a lot of their vocabulary from Arabic, which is the language we're also going to start this year and keep going. Arabic has probably given more loanwords to a wider range of languages, so it's probably going to be the biggest help in people who are looking across a huge swathe of territories. Where is an undocumented oral tradition that we might learn? So we're going to start learning an African language and a Turkic language of different kinds of language, and Arabic, being a Semitic language, is going to be a foundational language. Year 7, Swahili and Turkish will go into that sort of alternating cycle we've talked about, and we can add 2 more languages, and so I'm going to take different types of languages from areas that are significant and across the board. So in this year, we're going to add 2 languages, Persian and I call it one, Hindi Urdu, Hindustani, Hindi Urdu. And we're going to keep this up for 2 years because these have different scripts and different challenges of their own. But Persian is spoken across a huge swathe of Central Asia, and Hindi Urdu is the main language of India, Pakistan, this area. So anything that's in this area should be covered, hopefully have references, or these should be of help. In year 9, we can move all of these together into those alternating cycles and add 2 more languages. And so since I'm kind of just moving across the board, we're coming across to Malay Indonesian, an Austronesian language, and Maori, a Polynesian language, and continuing with Arabic and great books and other languages. In year 10, we could keep those first 4, Swahili, Turkish, Persian, Hindi, Urdu cycles. We could put Malaysian, Indonesian, and Maori into a cycle and open up for 2 more. Again, just utterly different kinds of languages. And here I chose Euskara, Basque, because it's a language isolate. Maybe there's something out there you'll encounter with it. And Tagalog, a major language of the Philippines. And an exciting thing this year in year 10 is after 4 or 5 years of Arabic study, we're now going to move this circle into reading and discussing the great books in Arabic. So Arabic will be the language of critical thought and discussion from this point on in this group. In year 11, we'll just continue the same procedure, adding more languages and pushing the other languages into cycles where they're going to continue to rotate around each other. So we might add 2 North American languages, 2 Native American languages, one from North America, one from South America, Quechua and Ojibwe. And in year 12, though, if we're presuming that is any sort of structure that says, okay, well, now maybe I'll go out and practice with these, we'll continue to have all of these languages that we've just talked about: Swahili, Turkish, Persian, Hindi, Urdu, Malaysian, Indonesian, Maori, Euskara, Tagalog, Quechua, Ojibwe, totally different kinds of languages cycling around each other, kept in active conversational ability, understanding how these languages work. Maybe we haven't looked at French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian, these other kinds of languages that are major areas, in a while. Let's bring these back in review. And let's also have this year be an intensive cultivation practicum, just encountering as many different kinds of languages as you can in that sort of language extraction environment. And with known languages, seeing how much you can get out of it so that when you meet somebody whose language you don't know, you'll be better able to extract it. Well, once again, these two preliminary tracks of study are suggested to me not only by my own thought process, but by the interests of and possibilities in the people I see being drawn to the idea of polyliteracy. If you have read this essay or listened to this talk all the way to the end, then I imagine you might also be intrigued by some of the ideas I've propounded. Please do spread them or share them with anyone you know who you think might be interested in them. Thank you very much for hearing me out. And let me say goodbye until next time, except for one moment. Many people like to see my cat Merlin and say a video of me is not complete without him. So here he is. Thank you very much for listening, and good night.